The judge's gavel hit the desk, and with that single sound, my world collapsed. Custody of the minor Caleb Whitaker is granted to the father, Ethan Whitaker. The estate and all shared assets are awarded to the defendant. Those words carved through me like cold metal. My attorney leaned forward, whispering something about appeals and evidence, but I couldn't hear her. My ears rang, my breath came in pieces. Across the courtroom, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks and smiled the kind of restrained, victorious smile only lawyers and predators share. His hand rested casually on our son's shoulder. Caleb looked confused, clutching his father's arm, the way he used to clutch mine at night when he couldn't sleep. The bailiff called my name, but I just stared at that small hand wrapped around the man who had just destroyed everything we built. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream to tell the court what Ethan had done, how he had manipulated my trust, forged my father's estate papers, and painted me as a fragile, financially unstable woman, unfit to raise her own child. But all I could do was stand there frozen, watching the man I once loved dismantle my life in front of strangers. Ethan turned to me as he guided Caleb toward the door, his tone low and polished. "You'll get visitation once you're stable again, Grace," he said. "You'll thank me one day." The door shut behind them, and with that soft click, silence filled the courtroom. The world kept moving, but I didn't. The lawyer gathered her files. The clerk stacked papers. The judge moved to the next case. And I, Grace Whitaker, 37 years old, daughter of William Whitaker, the most respected landowner in Pine Hollow, stood stripped of everything my family had built. Outside, autumn sunlight fell across the courthouse steps. My reflection in the glass door looked foreign pale, older broken. My hand tightened around the small brass key in my pocket, the only thing I had left from the Whitaker estate. My father had given it to me when I turned 21, saying, "You keep the key, Grace. The house keeps the family." But now the house wasn't mine. Nothing was. Reporters waited near the curb, shouting questions about the Whitaker divorce scandal. Ethan's law firm had made sure every headline painted me as the unfit ex-wife, the emotional liability, the burden. I walked past them silent, gripping the key so hard it cut into my palm. A photographer caught my face mid-step, tears blurring my vision. By evening, my picture was on the news beside Ethan's statement. "My only concern is my son's stability." Stability. That word mocked me as I drove the 2 hours back to the mountains to the small wooden cabin my mother once called the thinking place. I had nowhere else to go. Inside the car, Caleb's booster seat was still there, a half-empty juice box tucked beside it. I picked it up and pressed it against my chest. It still smelled like apple and sunshine, the kind of innocence the court said I was unfit to nurture. Night fell by the time I reached the cabin. I sat in the dark engine off-key in my palm. The silence felt heavier than grief. It was humiliation, betrayal, loss, and disbelief all merging into one suffocating weight. Somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered my father's words. "When the world takes everything, that's when you learn what's truly yours." But right then, I didn't want wisdom. I wanted my son. I wanted my life back. The estate's lights glowed faintly across the valley visible from my window. Ethan's world. My world. The same land my father built now under his control. My breath shook my fingers cold around that brass key. I didn't know it then, but that key would open something far greater than a locked door. It would open the truth. The road to Pine Hollow twisted through the mountains like a scar. Fog hung low over the trees, soft and indifferent, as if the world didn't care that my life had just burned to ashes. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway of my mother's old cabin, I could barely recognize it. The once blue shutters were gray with rot. The porch sagged under the weight of years, and ivy had claimed half the front wall. The mailbox still bore her handwriting, Whitaker, but the paint had peeled away like everything else that used to hold us together. I stepped out of the car, the air biting and damp. The cabin smelled of dust cedar and faint traces of her lavender oil. I hesitated before unlocking the door with trembling hands. The brass key turned easily, almost mockingly. Inside, everything was still. Furniture stood where she'd left it, covered in white sheets that looked like ghosts. The floor creaked under my steps. I traced my fingers across the mantel where framed photos once stood. My father's proud face. my mother's gentle smile, a younger me between them bright-eyed and certain that love and fairness were permanent things. Now those beliefs felt childish. I opened the windows, letting in the cold air. Somewhere outside, a crow called sharp and lonely. The sound seemed to echo my thoughts, empty, endless, unanswered. I dropped my suitcase near the couch and sank into one of the old armchairs. Its fabric smelled like time. For the first time in 10 years, there was no husband to impress, no child to tuck in, no schedule to obey. Just silence. Heavy, honest silence. I didn't know whether to be grateful or afraid. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the thin line of lights across the valley, the Whitaker estate. My father's land. Now Ethan's. The thought burned through me like acid. I could almost see him there, entertaining clients, pouring wine, talking about his new firm, pretending he hadn't gutted my life to feed his ambition. The anger was sharp but powerless. I had nothing. No job, no savings, no friends left from our world of charity galas and business dinners. I was an outcast in the empire my family built. The next morning, the knock on the door startled me. I opened it to find Mrs. Beatrice Moore standing on the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl, holding a casserole dish that smelled like tuna and warmth. "You look just like your mother the day she moved here," she said softly. Her voice carried the kind of sympathy that made you want to cry harder. "Come in," I whispered. She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the dusty furniture, the stacks of boxes, the thin woman I had become. "Your father would have never let this happen," she murmured. "He told me once, 'Grace will make this place shine again.'" I smiled faintly, though my throat ached. Maybe he overestimated me. "Nonsense," she said, setting the casserole down. "You have his eyes, and that fire of his, it's just buried under grief." She poured tea while I stared at the steam curling into the light. It reminded me of my mother's kitchen sunlit safe ordinary, things that felt impossible now. "You'll find your way," Mrs. Moore said. "Your father believed in fairness, and that belief runs deep in this valley." After she left, I wandered to the back porch. The woods hummed with cicadas. The wind smelled of pine and earth. My chest felt tight, like my heart was trying to remember how to beat in this new life. The key to the estate pressed against my thigh in my pocket. I clutched it without realizing, whispering into the emptiness, "Dad, what am I supposed to do now?" Somewhere far off, thunder rolled across the hills. And for just a second, I thought I heard his voice in that rumble, steady, patient, certain. "Find the truth, Grace. It's still yours." It was late afternoon when the sound of tires crunching on the gravel snapped me from my thoughts. I looked out the window, half expecting a delivery truck, or maybe Mrs. Moore again, but it was a black BMW, Ethan's. My heart lurched as the door opened and he stepped out dressed in a tailored gray suit that looked absurd against the backdrop of moss and decay. He didn't belong here. He never had. He adjusted his tie, scanned the cabin like a man inspecting damage after a storm, and smiled that same courtroom smile I'd come to hate. "Grace," he said, his voice perfectly calm, "you're a hard woman to reach." I stayed in the doorway, blocking his view inside. "There's nothing left to reach," I replied. His gaze flicked past me, taking in the cracked walls and unwashed windows. "So this is where you ended up. I would have expected something a little cleaner." The words slid off him like oil, deliberate and sharp. I clenched the doorframe. "Why are you here, Ethan?" "To be civil," he said, "and to make sure you're okay. After all, you're still the mother of my son." "Your son?" I repeated the phrase, tasting like rust. He smiled faintly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Grace. You'll see him soon, once you're stable." The word stable hit harder than it should have. He'd used it before in court and therapy and whispers to friends who believed every lie he told. "You mean once I have money again?" I said quietly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer and looked around, pretending to admire the property. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about the estate. It's too big for one man and a child. I might sell it. Market's strong right now. Investors love historic land." My throat tightened. "Sell my father's land?" Correction, he said smoothly. Our land. Joint marital property. Well, it was. He shrugged as if talking about an old car, not 4 generations of Whitaker legacy. Besides, it's not really profitable anymore. The taxes alone. You're unbelievable, I interrupted. You destroy everything and call it strategy. He chuckled softly. You always saw emotion as virtue. I see it as liability. His tone softened, almost mockingly tender. I did love you once, you know. But love doesn't balance a ledger. Get off my property, I said. He studied me for a long moment, eyes narrowing slightly, calculating something unseen. Still fighting, he murmured, You never did learn when to fold. He turned toward the car, then paused. Caleb misses you, he said without looking back. But he's adapting. Kids do. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Did he sleep well? Does he still collect stones from the creek? Does he ask for me, but the words caught in my throat? Ethan knew it. He opened his car door, that polished smile returning. You'll see him soon, Grace, he said, when you've proven you can provide. He drove away before I could speak, gravel spitting under his tires. I stood there long after the sound faded, fists trembling. The cabin's silence roared in my ears. My reflection in the window looked like someone I didn't recognize. Hair, unwashed eyes, hollow, mouth trembling between rage and despair. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, whispering to no one. He's not taking everything. Not again. My knees gave out and I slid to the floor, clutching the key to my father's estate so tightly that the metal left a mark in my palm. The key had always been a symbol of belonging, of family. Now it was a reminder of everything stolen. As the first rain of the season began to fall against the roof, I made a quiet promise to the empty room I wouldn't be erased. Not by Ethan. Not by the lies. Not by the world that believed him. Somewhere in the darkness of the house, behind the smell of dust and rot, my father's portrait watched from the hallway wall. The eyes I'd inherited seemed to say what I couldn't yet believe. He may have the land, but he doesn't have the truth. I spent the next morning in the attic, surrounded by boxes of old papers and faded memories. The air smelled like cedar and age. Cobwebs hung from the beams like curtains of time. I was searching for something, though I didn't yet know what some trace of the father who had always seemed to have the answers. My father, William Whitaker, wasn't a man of luxury. He was a man of order. Every ledger, every letter, every photo was cataloged in his looping handwriting. I ran my fingers across a wooden chest marked Family Records. The lid creaked open and the scent of tobacco drifted out, a smell that once meant safety. Inside were files, birth certificates, letters, and one framed photo I hadn't seen in years. It was from my 16th birthday. He stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder, pride in his eyes. The plaque beneath read, Integrity isn't inherited, it's earned. His words echoed in my head, overlapping with the sound of his voice from long ago. Grace, he had said that day, you can lose money, property, even reputation. But if you lose your integrity, you lose the right to your own name. I'd laughed then, young and naive, telling him I'd never let anyone take what was ours. He'd smiled sadly, as if he already knew life would test that promise. I sat on the attic floor, clutching the photo. Dad, I whispered, I failed you. My voice cracked in the emptiness. But something inside me pushed back against the shame, an ember refusing to die. The memory of him didn't belong to Ethan or the court or the headlines. It belonged to me. I packed the photo in some papers, then headed downstairs when a knock startled me. It was Mrs. Moore again, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. You have visitors, she said, smiling faintly. Behind her, a delivery man held a small box. This came by courier. No return address. I took the box, puzzled. Inside was a letter sealed in wax, the kind my father used for official correspondence. The handwriting made my heart jolt. It was unmistakably his. On the envelope for Grace, when she no longer believes in fairness. My breath caught. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 2 lines written in his steady script. Go to Henry Dalton. He knows where to look. Henry Dalton, my father's old attorney. He'd retired years ago, maybe more. I hadn't seen him since the funeral. The last time we spoke, he'd held my hand and said, "Your father was proud of you, Grace. He trusted you'd know what to do when the time came." I hadn't understood what he meant until now. "Henry's still alive, isn't he?" I asked Mrs. Moore, my voice thin. She nodded slowly. "Last I heard, he's in Maple Ridge. Runs his practice from home these days." She hesitated. "Your father visited him 2 weeks before he died. Said he was updating his will." The words landed like thunder. I felt the air leave my lungs. "Updating his will?" She nodded again. "Said it was important. Said he wanted to make sure his daughter was protected." Protected. That word spun through me like electricity. Ethan had presented a will in court, the one that gave him control of the estate. But what if it wasn't the only one? What if my father had changed it and Ethan had buried the truth? I grabbed my coat. "Grace." Mrs. Moore called. "It's late and the roads I'll go in the morning," I said, though. My heart was already racing ahead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing my father's voice from years ago, calm and deliberate as he wrote by lamplight. "Fairness isn't something the world gives you, Grace. It's something you fight for when no one's looking." The rain outside grew steady, tapping against the windows like a metronome of fate. And as I stared into the darkness, the promise I'd made in the courtroom came back to me, not just to survive, but to reclaim what was right. Tomorrow I would find Henry Dalton. Tomorrow I would find the truth my father left behind. Morning came gray and cold with mist curling through the trees like smoke. I drove toward Maple Ridge, gripping the steering wheel as if my life depended on it, because in some ways it did. The town was smaller than I remembered, just a row of shops, a faded diner, and a weathered law office with gold letters that read, "Henry Dalton Attorney at Law." My heart thudded as I stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed weakly. The office smelled of old books, lemon oil, and time. Henry sat behind a desk stacked with papers, his once black hair now snow white. He looked up slowly, and when his eyes met mine, I saw recognition flicker through the fog of years. "Grace Whitaker," he whispered. "Good Lord, you look just like your father." My throat tightened. "You got my message." He frowned. "Message." I held up the letter. His face went pale. He motioned me to sit. "I prayed this day would never come," he said, voice trembling. "But if you're here, it means Ethan finally did what your father feared." "He stole the estate," I said quietly. "And my son." Henry closed his eyes. William suspected he might. That man had charm and calculation in equal measure. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small iron key on a faded red ribbon. "This," he said, "opens the safe in my archives. Your father asked me to keep something there for you, a document he didn't want anyone else to see." My pulse quickened. "A will?" Henry nodded slowly. "The real one. He changed it 3 months before his death, but after the funeral, Ethan came here under the guise of collecting financial documents. I was in the hospital at the time. By the time I returned, the second copy of the revised will was gone." He leaned back in his chair, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I tried to warn you, but your husband had already filed the falsified version in probate court. I had no proof to contest it." My hands clenched on the armrest. "So it's still here. If it survived the years?" "Yes." We walked down a narrow hall lined with dusty file cabinets until we reached a heavy door marked Archives. Henry fumbled with the key. The lock clicked and the scent of metal and dust filled the air. Against the far wall stood an old safe, paint-peeling brass handle dulled with age. Henry turned the combination slowly. My heart pounded with each rotation. When the door creaked open, it revealed stacks of ledger's boxes and a single envelope sealed in wax, the same emblem my father used, a carved oak tree. Henry handed it to me with shaking hands. "He wanted you to find this only when you were ready to believe in fairness again." My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was my father's handwriting, bold and steady. "To my daughter, Grace. If you are reading this, then the world has tried to take from you what I meant for you to keep. This estate, this land, and this family name belong to you not because of inheritance, but because of integrity. You will face betrayal. Do not let it destroy you. Do not let vengeance blind you to the truth. Justice will find its way through you." I read the words aloud until my voice cracked. Beneath the letter lay a smaller envelope with the words Addendum to Will, revised copy. My father had done it. He'd changed everything. Henry nodded toward it. That's your proof, but there's more you should know. He added a clause, a condition. What kind of condition, I asked? Henry's eyes met mine. He wrote that if you ever use this inheritance to harm or seek revenge, the estate reverts to the state. The words hung in the air like thunder. My father hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a test of character. I stared down at the paper that could undo Ethan completely, but also destroy me if I used it wrong. Henry said softly, "He believed you'd choose justice over anger." I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my coat. Then I won't prove him wrong. Outside, the wind howled through the valley as if carrying my father's voice. "Don't fight, Dirty Grace. Win clean." The drive back to Pine Hollow felt different this time. The same winding road that had once led me to exile now carried the faint pulse of purpose. The letter sat beside me on the passenger seat, heavy as a living thing. My father's handwriting glowed faintly in the afternoon light, the ink a bridge between the dead and the living. When I reached the cabin, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and spread everything across the kitchen table, the letter, the addendum, the notarized stamp, and the embossed Whitaker seal that no forger could ever duplicate. It was all real. Ethan had lied. My father had seen it coming. My pulse thudded in my ears as I reread the clause. If my heir seeks vengeance, this inheritance shall return to the state of Pennsylvania, for property built on spite cannot hold the name Whitaker. The words burned. Justice, not revenge. Integrity, not hatred. It was as if my father had written them for this exact version of me, the broken, angry woman sitting alone, shaking with equal parts grief and fury. I wanted to storm into Ethan's office, slam the paper on his desk, and watch his empire collapse in front of everyone. I wanted him to lose everything the way I had. But my father's warning pinned me to the chair. The estate wasn't just money. It was a legacy built on fairness, the one principle Ethan had trampled. If I broke that, I'd lose more than land. I'd lose my father's faith. I stared out the window at the gray hills, the rain now reduced to mist. How do I fight fairly against someone who doesn't believe in fairness? I whispered. As if in answer, thunder rolled far away, the kind that seems to speak in syllables. I spent the next several hours reading through every page of the will, highlighting signatures, noting discrepancies, and cross-referencing dates. My economics degree, long buried under years of domestic life, kicked back into gear like an engine relit after years in storage. The numbers made sense. The fraud did not. The falsified version Ethan had filed in court had been altered in two crucial places, one in the property distribution, one in the witness signature. Henry was right. It was deliberate. I sat back, hands trembling, as the truth crystallized into something cold and powerful. Ethan had committed document fraud, a felony, and done it with such precision that no one questioned it. But now I had the one thing he hadn't planned for the truth, signed and sealed. I thought of Caleb, 10 years old, bright, trusting, and caught between two worlds. He still believed his father was the hero. I couldn't destroy that image overnight, no matter how much I wanted to. He didn't need to see his father in prison. He needed to see his mother stand taller than lies. That meant waiting, building, preparing. Not as a wife begging for justice, but as a woman reclaiming it. I spent that night scanning the documents and storing copies in cloud drives, then in a fireproof box beneath the floorboards. If anything happened to me, the evidence would live on. Around midnight, exhaustion finally dragged me toward sleep, but my mind wouldn't rest. I dreamed of my father sitting at his desk under the amber glow of a lamp, the sound of his pen scratching across parchment. He looked up at me with that calm, certain gaze he always had. "Grace," he said, his voice soft but firm. "A fight for justice begins long before the courtroom. It begins the moment you decide not to become what hurt you." I woke up with tears on my cheeks and the strange sensation that he was still somewhere in the house. I walked to the old family portrait hanging in the hall. Dust streaked the glass, but beneath it my father's eyes looked almost alive. "I won't fail you," I whispered. "Not this time." As I turned off the light, the estate key in my pocket felt warmer than usual, as though it knew something I didn't. What I didn't know yet was that this key and what it unlocked would soon turn the entire story upside down. Dawn crept over Pine Hollow pale and uncertain, like the beginning of an unwritten chapter. I stood on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the fog roll through the trees, and wondered if my father had ever felt this torn between righteousness and rage. Inside, the safe copy of his will sat beneath the floorboards, and with it the power to destroy Ethan. But every time I imagined exposing him, I saw Caleb's face the confusion, the heartbreak, the quiet loyalty to a man who didn't deserve it. That vision was enough to stop me. For now. Henry's voice from the day before echoed in my mind. Justice is patient, Grace, but revenge burns too hot to last. I hated how right he was. I decided to stay silent for now, but not idle. If Ethan wanted to paint me as weak, I'd rebuild strength on my own terms. That meant a job, an income stability proof that I could stand without him. The old laptop on my kitchen table whirred like a ghost as I typed out my first resume in a decade. My fingers hesitated over the section marked employment history. 10 blank years stared back at me, the cost of loyalty disguised as domestic life. I wrote instead, former educator seeking re-entry into the workforce. Skilled in analysis, finance, and organization. It was a small lie, but one that felt closer to the truth than the years I'd spent smiling beside Ethan at charity dinners, pretending to matter. By afternoon, I'd driven into town and pinned copies to bulletin boards, the library, the post office, the small community college where I once guest lectured. The secretary there, Carol, recognized me. Grace Whitaker. She said, her tone uncertain, the kind reserved for ghosts. "It's just Grace now," I replied. "I'm looking for work." She frowned sympathetically. "We don't have teaching positions, but the local bank's hiring part-time. It's not much, but it's something." I thanked her and drove straight to Mountain View Community Bank. The manager, Patricia Walsh, was about my age, but carried herself with the grounded confidence I'd lost. She looked skeptical as I handed her my resume. 10 years out of the field is a long gap, she said. "What makes you think you can pick up where you left off?" "Because I didn't forget how to think," I said quietly. "I just forgot how to believe I could use it." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll give you a trial period. 3 days a week, 15 an hour. If you can keep up, we'll talk about full-time." It wasn't much, but to me it felt like sunlight after a decade of shadow. That evening, I sat by the fire, staring at the flickering light dancing against the walls. I thought about my father, how he'd built everything from the ground up with calloused hands and stubborn hope. If I was truly his daughter, I could build again too. But my silence came with a price. The longer I waited, the more Ethan tightened his hold on Caleb. His lawyer sent carefully worded emails about visitation readiness and environmental suitability phrases that turned motherhood into a legal commodity. Each line was another reminder of how completely he'd stripped me of power. But power could be rebuilt quietly. I spent my nights poring over financial textbooks, relearning the systems Ethan had used to manipulate me. By the end of the second week, I'd already helped Patricia correct a bookkeeping error that saved the bank thousands. She started leaving complex loan applications on my desk by accident, testing me. I passed every one. Mrs. Moore stopped by sometimes with groceries and the kind of moral clarity that only comes with age. "You don't have to shout to be strong, Grace," she told me one evening watching the fire. "Some wars are won in whispers." I smiled faintly. "That's what Henry said." "Then listen to him," she said. "Revenge is loud. Justice whispers." That night, as the rain drummed softly on the roof, I opened my father's letter again. His words glowed under the lamplight like scripture. "Do not let vengeance blind you to the truth." I folded the page, pressed it to my chest, and made a silent vow I would rebuild piece by piece until the day came when justice could speak for itself. 3 months later, the leaves began to turn, painting Pine Hollow in gold and rust. My life had found a fragile rhythm: work at the bank, 3 days a week, study at night, and quiet solitude in between. I had learned how to survive on little and how to find meaning in less. But peace has a way of attracting storms. One Thursday afternoon, as I was locking up the bank, Patricia handed me an envelope. "A man dropped this off for you," she said. Said you'd know who it was from. My stomach twisted when I saw Ethan's handwriting. The note inside was brief, confident, like everything he wrote, dinner tomorrow. Let's be civilized for once, E. I almost tore it up on the spot, but something in me, something cold and steady, told me to go. Civility could be a weapon too if you knew how to hold it. The next evening, I drove to the Lakeside Grill, the same restaurant where we'd once celebrated his first big case win. The maitre d' recognized him instantly. Of course, Ethan Whitaker, the charming success story dining with his ex-wife out of respect. He was already there when I arrived, wine-poured cufflinks gleaming. "You look improved," he said, eyes flicking over my simple navy dress. "The mountain air must be good for you." "And deceit must be good for you," I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. His smirk didn't falter. "Still sharp. I'll admit I was surprised you took my invitation." "Curiosity," I said. "I wanted to see what the man who took everything looks like when he has no one left to lie to." He chuckled. "Always the dramatist." He leaned back. "I'm expanding the firm. The sale of your father's estate made that possible. Investors love heritage properties. It adds legitimacy." My hands tightened around the napkin. "You sold it?" "Not yet," he said lightly. "But soon. It's too much house for me and Caleb. You should be grateful it'll help fund his education." His casual tone sliced deeper than anger. I took a sip of water to steady my voice. "Tell me something, Ethan. When you falsified my father's will, did it feel this easy?" The glass froze halfway to his lips. "What did you say?" "You heard me." I reached into my purse and slid a single sheet across the table. The notarized page from the real will, its seal unmistakable under the restaurant's dim light. His color drained. "That's impossible." "Is it?" I said softly. "You were clever. You used your access to Henry's office, altered the witness page, and filed a false version before probate. But you made one mistake: you didn't destroy every copy." His jaw clenched. "You can't prove any of that." "Not yet," I agreed. "But imagine what a judge would say when he sees two identical wills with conflicting signatures. Or better yet, when he learns that one copy was locked in a safe under Henry Dalton's guardianship until last month." He stared at me, breathing hard. "You think this will bring your father back or your son?" I leaned forward, voice calm and cold. "No. It'll bring back my name. And maybe that's enough." For the first time, Ethan's composure cracked. His fingers drummed against the table, a tick I hadn't seen since law school. "What do you want?" "Grace," he asked, finally, his voice low. "To ruin me?" I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. "I want you to understand what it feels like to lose control and still choose not to become the thing that broke you." I stood, leaving the page where it lay. "Consider this your one warning." He grabbed my wrist grip tight, voice trembling with fury. "You won't win this." "I already have," I whispered, pulling free. "Because I'm not you." The entire restaurant had fallen silent. Every eye followed me as I walked out the autumn air, slicing cool against my skin. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release. For the first time in years, I'd faced him without flinching. In my rearview mirror, Ethan still sat at the table, staring down at the will. His reflection looked smaller than I remembered, like a man who'd just realized the truth could still touch him. The subpoena arrived 2 weeks later, crisp and impersonal, stamped with the county seal. Ethan had filed a defamation suit. Typical. When a man like him lost control, he didn't fight for truth, he fought for optics. But he'd made one fatal miscalculation. I wasn't the same woman he'd destroyed a year ago. The courtroom smelled of oak and disinfectant, a mixture of history and fear. I sat beside Henry Dalton, his trembling hands steadying the folder of evidence between us. Across the aisle, Ethan looked immaculate. Polished suit, confident smirk, but his eyes betrayed something new, the faint glimmer of uncertainty. His lawyer, Marcus Webb, a man with the charisma of a serpent, opened the proceedings with a practiced sneer. "Your Honor, my client has suffered reputational damage due to Mrs. Whitaker's reckless accusations. She has fabricated claims of fraud in a desperate attempt to regain property legally awarded to Mr. Whitaker during divorce proceedings." Judge Morrison, the same man who had once ruled against me, raised an eyebrow. And your evidence of fabrication, her claims are unsupported by any legitimate documentation, Webb replied smoothly. Sarah, my new attorney recommended by Henry, rose calmly. Your Honor, we have here notarized documents signed and sealed by the late William Whitaker preserved in the custody of his estate attorney, Mr. Dalton. She placed the evidence on the bench, her tone as sharp as glass. These documents prove that the will presented during the divorce was falsified. Independent handwriting analysis confirms that the witness signatures were forged. The judge leaned forward. Forged? Webb tried to interrupt, but Sarah held firm. Yes, Your Honor. The revision was designed to strip my client of her rightful inheritance and transfer control to Mr. Whitaker. This was not a clerical error. This was deliberate deception. Henry stood to testify. His voice, though fragile, carried the weight of truth. Mr. Whitaker came to my office days after William's funeral. He claimed he was collecting tax records. I was hospitalized shortly after. When I returned, the addendum to William's will was missing. I feared the worst, but without Grace's request to unseal the archive, I had no authority to reveal it. Judge Morrison examined the signatures under magnification. The witness names are nearly identical, but the ink type and pressure are inconsistent. And the estate seal here, this one's embossed, the other printed. Webb tried to regain ground, launching into a technical argument about procedural oversight, but the judge raised a hand. Enough. His gaze turned to Ethan. Mr. Whitaker, do you wish to respond? Ethan stood confident, mask flickering. Your Honor, this is an unfortunate misunderstanding. The documents she's presented are obviously fabricated. That's a bold claim, the judge interrupted, considering the notary stamp matches records filed with the county clerk 15 years ago. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan's lawyer whispered something urgently, but Ethan's eyes darted toward me instead, full of venom and disbelief. Sarah delivered the closing argument with surgical precision. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitaker isn't asking for damages or restitution. She's asking for the truth to be recognized. Her father's name was used to commit fraud. Her child's legacy was nearly erased. We're here not to destroy Mr. Whitaker, but to restore what he stole: dignity, justice, and integrity. The judge removed his glasses, his expression unreadable. The evidence is overwhelming. This court finds that the last will submitted by Mr. Whitaker was falsified. The property and all assets connected to the Whitaker estate are hereby reinstated to Mrs. Grace Whitaker as the rightful heir. Furthermore, this court refers the matter of document fraud and perjury to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. Ethan's composure shattered. You can't do this, he shouted. That estate is mine, Judge Morrison said flatly. You built your empire on deceit, Mr. Whitaker, and deceit doesn't stand on this floor. The gavel struck final and irrevocable. I didn't move, not when Ethan's voice cracked, not when Webb gathered the ruins of his argument. Not even when Henry placed a trembling hand on mine and whispered, Your father can rest now. Outside, the air felt different, cleaner. For the first time, justice didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like homecoming. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and relief. Reporters shouted questions as I walked out, flashes blinding against the gray sky, but their noise felt distant, muted by the quiet rhythm of my heartbeat. Mrs. Whitaker, how does it feel to win? One voice called. Do you plan to press criminal charges? Asked another. I didn't answer. Justice didn't need sound. It needed peace. Henry steadied me by the elbow, his cane clicking softly against the concrete. You did it, Grace, he murmured. You did what your father couldn't. I shook my head. No, Henry. He did it. He just needed me to finish it. Ethan stood near the bottom of the steps, drenched, his perfect suit clinging to him like punishment. For the first time, there was no calculation in his expression, only disbelief. He looked smaller now, the man who'd once towered over every boardroom, who'd treated my heart like leverage. When our eyes met, something flickered: anger, then shame, then a hollow kind of regret. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The law clerk handed him his copy of the ruling, and he just stood there, paper trembling in his hand. That was his new empire: empty pages and public humiliation. I walked past him without a word, but as I reached the car, I turned back. Ethan, I said quietly. He froze. You were right about one thing. His eyes narrowed. "What's that love doesn't balance a ledger, but fairness does?" His face twisted not in rage this time, but in something that looked almost like understanding. "Grace," he began, but his voice cracked. For a fleeting moment, I saw not the villain, but the man who once brought me wildflowers from the side of the road, who believed in us before ambition hollowed him out. But pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. That night, I returned to the estate for the first time in nearly 2 years. The gates creaked open hesitant like they didn't recognize me. The front lawn was overgrown, the fountain-dry ivy clawing at the brick walls, but it was still home. I parked in the circular driveway, stepped out, and let the cold wind wash over me. Each step toward the front door felt like walking through memory, the echoes of dinner parties. Caleb's laughter in the hall, my father's slow humming from the study. I unlocked the door with the same brass key that had never left my pocket. It turned smoothly as if it had been waiting. The air inside smelled faintly of old paper and rain-soaked wood. I walked through the rooms one by one, the study with my father's books, untouched the piano where my mother used to play the nursery with the faded wallpaper of clouds. I stopped there the longest. Caleb's old drawings still hung crookedly on the wall, stick figures of us holding hands beneath a crooked sun. I traced the crayon lines with my fingertips and felt tears gather before I could stop them. That's when I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the drive. My heart jumped. I went to the window. Ethan. He climbed out slowly. No umbrella, no arrogance left. For a moment, I almost shut the lights and pretended I wasn't there. But then I saw Caleb step out from the passenger seat, his small hand gripping a backpack. My breath caught. Ethan walked him to the porch, said something I couldn't hear, and then unbelievably he left. Caleb knocked. I opened the door, knees shaking. "Mom." His voice was smaller, cautious. "Dad said I could stay the weekend. He said you won." I crouched down, tears slipping free. "Yeah," I whispered, pulling him into my arms. We both did. He hugged me tightly, smelling of rain and childhood. The house once hollow filled again with warmth. Upstairs, my father's portrait seemed to glow softly in the dim light, as though even he approved of how justice had finally been served, not with vengeance, but with grace. Caleb fell asleep early that night, curled up in his old room beneath the same blanket his grandmother had knitted before he was born. The house was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping the windows, and in that quiet, the memories returned gentler, now not sharp like before. I sat at my father's desk in the study where dust had settled over his typewriter like a thin layer of time. The lamp cast a soft circle of light over a blank page. I hadn't planned to write, but my hands moved before my mind caught up. The words came out steady, deliberate, each one carrying a piece of the weight I'd carried for years. "Ethan, by the time you read this, the estate will already be gone from your name. The courts took what you stole, but that's not the real loss. What you truly lost was the chance to make things right before the world forced you to. You thought money and control were power. They're not. Power is waking up and knowing your conscience won't betray you before breakfast. You once told me fairness was weakness. I've spent a year learning it's the only thing that lasts." I paused, glancing at my reflection in the darkened window, the woman who'd walked into court as a ghost and walked out as something unbreakable. My pen kept moving. "You'll survive this, Ethan. You'll find ways to rebuild, just like you always do. But if you ever wonder why it never feels like enough, remember this: you can't rebuild anything on deceit. It collapses every time. I didn't fight you to hurt you. I fought you so our son could one day understand that truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand. For his sake, I hope you find a way to stand again, too." When I finished, I sealed the letter and placed it on the desk beside his old monogrammed cufflinks, the same ones he'd worn the day we met in law school. For a moment, my hand hovered over them. Then I left both where they belonged in the past. Later, I walked through the hallways barefoot, the wooden floors cool against my skin. The house no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt alive, breathing again. I stopped at my father's portrait in the foyer. His painted eyes seemed softer now, almost smiling. "You were right," I whispered. "Fairness is the only inheritance worth keeping." Before bed, I peeked in on Caleb. He was asleep, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the storm outside. On the nightstand beside him sat one of his drawings, a new one. It was of the cabin, the estate, and 3 figures standing together, me, him, and what looked like Grandpa drawn in faint pencil lines watching from the background. A lump formed in my throat. I kissed his forehead and turned off the light. Downstairs, I found myself standing by the front door staring into the rain. I thought about Ethan alone in whatever apartment he'd retreated to, the silence that must have followed him home, the echo of everything he'd destroyed, chasing him through sleepless nights. Justice had been served. Yes. But there's a kind of punishment deeper than prison or poverty. It's knowing you were wrong and realizing too late that no one believes your apologies anymore. I left the letter with Henry the next morning. If he comes by, I said, give this to him, but only if he asks for it. Henry looked at me, eyes glistening. You're your father's daughter through and through. I smiled faintly. He taught me that mercy isn't weakness. It's the final proof that you've won. Driving home, the fog lifted over the valley, revealing the estate's reflection in the lake below, whole again, just as my father intended. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of what was taken. I felt the weight of what was restored: my name, my son, and my peace. Justice had been done. Now healing could begin. Spring came quietly to Pine Hollow, soft green, returning to branches that had long stood bare. The estate no longer felt haunted. It breathed again. Windows open, laughter echoing faintly through halls that once carried only silence. Caleb spent his mornings exploring the orchard with Mrs. Moore's dog trailing behind him, and his afternoons in the study building, Lego towers beside my desk while I worked remotely for the bank. It wasn't the life I'd lost, it was the one I was meant to build all along. One afternoon, while sorting through my father's old journals, I found an envelope tucked between the pages, brittle with age. Written in his neat, deliberate script were 5 words, for when justice is done. My heart stuttered as I opened it. Inside was a simple letter. No instructions, no riddles this time. Just one line written in ink that had barely faded. Grace, you will not win by punishment. You will win by peace. I sat there for a long time, the meaning of those words washing over me. My father had known he'd known the fight would find me one day, and that the world would test the strength of my name. He hadn't built Whitaker Estate as a monument of wealth. He'd built it as a sanctuary of fairness, and I'd nearly lost that by letting anger speak louder than principle. But now, for the first time, I understood him. The front door creaked open, and Caleb's voice echoed down the hall. Mom, someone's here. I stood, wiping away the tears I hadn't realized had fallen, and walked into the foyer. Ethan stood on the porch, holding his hat in his hands. His suit was worn, his posture humble, no trace of the man who once measured his worth in power. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I came to see Caleb, he said softly. If that's allowed. I studied him, every instinct, waiting for arrogance, manipulation, the familiar smirk, but it didn't come. He's in the orchard, I said finally. You can wait in the kitchen. He nodded, stepping inside like a man entering a church he no longer deserved. We sat in silence, the kind that felt more like truce than tension. He glanced around at the walls, the old photos, the glow of the fireplace. I always hated this house, he admitted quietly. It made me feel small. Your father, he made me feel small. That wasn't his fault, I said. That was your choice. He exhaled slowly. I know. I think that's what drove me to destroy it. And you. His voice broke slightly. I'm sorry, Grace. Not for losing. For lying. For a moment, I wanted to tell him how little his words meant, how apology could never rebuild what deceit had burned. But then I saw his reflection in the window, tired, hollow human. And I remembered my father's line, you will win by peace. I don't forgive you, I said finally. But I don't hate you either. Hating you kept me alive once. It can't keep me free. He nodded, eyes wet. That's more mercy than I deserve. Caleb burst through the back door, then cheeks flushed from running. Dad, he shouted, running straight into Ethan's arms. Ethan froze startled before holding him awkward at first, then tighter. I turned away, giving them that moment. When they left later that evening, Ethan paused at the gate. You were always stronger than I thought, he said. No, I replied. I just stopped letting you define my weakness. As the car disappeared down the drive, I stood beneath the old oak at the edge of the property, the one my father planted when I was born. The wind rustled through its branches, and for the first time in years, I smiled without pain. The estate, the trial, the loss, all of it had led here. Justice hadn't ruined him. It had revealed him, and it had restored me. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the moonlight spill across the hills. Inside, Caleb's laughter mingled with the creak of the old piano as he played a few uncertain notes. I whispered into the quiet, not expecting an answer. "We're home, Dad, and we kept your name clean." Somewhere deep in the orchard, the wind stirred again, steady, warm, forgiving, as if the earth itself exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt light. The fight was over. Peace at last had the final word.